From beautiful East Tennessee in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, you're listening to the Sherry Voluntary Show, and we thank you for being with us today. I have with me Mr. Daniel Blanchett, my producer.
Cat wrangler.
Yeah, yeah, squirrel wrangler, because I get distracted a lot.
Well, and I mostly am throwing squirrels at you.
That's true. You do try to distract me a lot. But so today we were going to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court with the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh by President Trump to replace Kennedy, who is stepping down.
Hold on. Can you say that one more time just so that everybody can revel in the wonderful... Who's our president again?
Donald Trump.
President Trump. Yeah, that's right. That one was for you, Josh.
Oh, this is not a show about your personal vendetta. Vendettae.
No. I just know that he loves Donald Trump so much.
Yeah.
So we got to say it twice.
Yeah. Okay. It's not something I'm particularly happy with either, but, I can admit that he hasn't done everything terrible, but, kind of all presidents are terrible.
He's a president. So, you can only expect so much.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the system we have. But anyways, back to the Supreme Court. So we have this nominee process going on, and, this Kavanaugh is terrible on the Fourth Amendment. But so has every other judge.
The Fourth Amendment got us where we are today.
Right.
Yay, Patriot Act.
Yes. And even further back than that. But what we wanted to sort of talk about was not this particular political thing going on, but the whole concept of the Supreme Court and what it does and, what it's supposed to do and what it actually does. So you were mentioning before that the Miranda Act was... Yeah,
so the people are making a big deal about how Judge Kavanaugh is, helped defend the metadata searches and, how, oh my goodness, it's a judge that's against the Fourth Amendment. But the Fourth Amendment has been in place, since our country, since the Constitution was enacted. But the last Fourth Amendment friendly decision was the Miranda decision in 1966.
Yeah.
Not exactly a bastion of people defending your Fourth Amendment rights on the Supreme Court for a very long time.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that the Supreme Court, the judicial branch of the federal government, was supposed to be like a check and balance to the executive power, and then the other, what's the other branch?
Oh, the executive and the legislative.
Legislative, yeah. So it was supposed to be like a check and balance. They're all supposed to check each other, but really, it doesn't act that way at all.
I mean, it is. It's like a rubber check. Like you have the stamp with a red check mark, and that's what they exist. Like they'll every once in a while they'll do the right thing. Like they'll wait. When was the last time they did the right thing? I guess the Heller decision, they upheld the Second Amendment in D.C., but that was a pretty narrow ruling. I can't remember the last time I was really super thrilled
with the bake the cake.
But again, that was so narrow,
and it was the wrong reasons.
Right.
They upheld it. They did the right thing, but they did it for the wrong reasons. So it didn't actually make anything better.
Right.
And that's the thing, that the Supreme Court was really constructed to adjudicate law for specific cases. And most of those were disputes among states or where the United States was a party to a bigger international claim. So it wasn't really intended to ever make states do what the federal government wanted, but that's effectively what it has done. George Mason, during the ratifying convention of the Constitution, said he believed it would allow the nationalists to exploit and annihilate the state courts. And this is a quote from him. It says, "There is no limitation. It goes to everything. The inferior courts are to be as numerous as Congress may think proper. They are to be of whatever nature they please." Mason argued that the scope of the cases that would be taken up by the federal judiciary would be virtually unlimited, noting, "When we consider the nature of these courts, we must conclude that their effect and operation will be utterly to destroy the state governments." And that's really what they've done, is they've you can have any state make any law that it desires, but then the federal court can step in and say, no, you don't.
Yeah.
Like, you're not doing that. And so that's a problem when you have supposedly sovereign states,
Right.
and what they call states' rights, which are really delegated powers, not rights.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so that's why it's a good thing to support our friends, Mike Meharry and Clay Davis over at the 10th Amendment Center.
And Michael Bolden.
Michael Bolden. So as they work toward helping fight these things,
Yeah.
it goes a long way. And
Yeah. Yes. And this article that I was reading from is actually from the 10th Amendment Center. And, that's the thing with people like us who aren't necessarily a party to the political system. We're being voluntarists. We don't necessarily like the Constitution, but if you're going to use the political system, then you need to make them hold to their own standard.
Right.
So the 10th Amendment Center, they really do a good job of doing that and trying to use their own, law against them to do what they actually said it was intended for when they
Right.
enacted the
and
Constitution.
to help establish a precedent of lower structure organizations and people ignore the law and have that be the precedent, so that eventually the laws at the federal level go away
Right.
through disuse.
Yeah, and 1810 was the first time that the Supreme Court overturned a state law, and it was in the favor of some of the legislative branch in Georgia when there was some land deals, and there was people said that some of the legislative branch had maybe been not so upfront, had been a little shady.
Right.
And
Can you imagine having a legislative branch that was only a little shady?
yeah, I'm sure they were a lot then too. But it actually, the state of Georgia said these land deals, they're void. You can't do this. And the Supreme Court stepped in and said, oh, wait a second. Yes, they can. Like they just protected that political elite class, and that's generally what happens. It's not to say that the Supreme Court has never done anything that's on the right side of justice, but they're not really in the business of giving justice. So what they're supposed to do is render an opinion, not
Right.
make law. But that opinion is supposed to be what the legislative and executive branches use to make the law, but
Right.
it's not the way that it has effectively worked. So
Yeah, the main effect that I've seen in my lifetime for the Supreme Court is that they provide talking points for legislators and people who want to rule us, so that they can have an argument. You got to help me protect you from that court, because if we let the wrong people pick, then they're going to overrule laws you like, and they're going to allow laws you don't like to stand. And they both do the exact same thing. They just pick different ones. So my favorite is the conservatives who say, "Oh, we want strict constructionist originalists to be on the court," but they only want that
in their favor.
They
Yeah.
don't they're not looking for a judge that's going to say, "No, you can't have a standing army."
Right. Yeah. They're not going to do anything that they don't like. I mean, it's all about that proxy force that's everyone wants to use. That's what political systems are about making factions to use that force against each other. So that's really what it boils down to, is that you have this sort of oligarchy of, 9 people who get to determine the law that everyone lives under, regardless of, the whole point of having a representatives was to represent the people of every given area, so that they could have some kind of say in the laws that govern them. And then
Right.
also with nullification, with the 10th Amendment, you have that idea that people have the right to say, well, you know what, we don't agree with this law. We find it unjust, and therefore we're not going to obey it. We're just going to ignore it. These are all things that the Supreme Court has totally run roughshod over. That state courts, many of them run roughshod over and won't even
Right.
allow to be discussed. So you have this, this idea that the courts are supposed to be about justice, but they're not.
Right.
They're about protecting the state's interests.
And like our current president's favorite tool in his toolbox when he was a developer, the use of eminent domain for personal gain.
Yes.
That's all happened under the guise of, an originalist supporting court that's been conservative and in power for decades now. And so you get a developer that wants to do something, so he goes to his buddies in the local government and goes, hey, that neighborhood's a blight because they don't look as nice as newer construction. So we should seize that property from them and just, and then you guys can then sell it to me, and I get a sweetheart deal on the price because they were
Yeah.
trying to negotiate a higher price. And then I can raise your tax base by having a commercial venture here.
Yeah. And that's what got me into libertarianism, really, was the eminent domain issue, because I started seeing how government works against the interests of people and what they actually want. So, Neil Bortz had a radio show, and that's where I got introduced to the whole idea, because I'd never heard of eminent domain before. I was a young person in my 20s and was like, what does that even mean, and so hearing about cases where, the city would take people's property to sell to a developer to develop, like you said, commercial or even residential.
Yeah.
And then the deal would fall through and that property would sit empty.
Yeah.
Not that's not the main bad thing. The main bad thing is that they can just take it from you.
Right.
But then it doesn't even have that.
They take it under the
benefit.
guise of public good, but really what it is like everything else in government. It's cronies helping cronies.
Yeah, revenue. It's about revenue. So, eminent domain is one of the most terrible uses of government, because it's not, once you give them that power in an unlimited way or even in a limited way, they make the laws so they can interpret them any way that they feel suits them as well.
Yeah.
So they're not going to take your interests, which is one individual, over the interests that they view, because they feel that they're standing for the common good, right? Like, oh, we're these public servants, so we have to do what's best for everyone, and it's okay if we destroy your life individually.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah.
not okay.
So there was one use of eminent domain that I approved of that didn't actually happen, but they were talking about it. It was right after the eminent domain case made it through the Supreme Court, and Justice Breyer was the swing vote. There was the town council in his town in New Hampshire talked about annexing or taking his home through eminent domain and making it a museum to government power abuse.
That'd be wonderful. And that's the kind of thing that should happen. These people should be subject to the things that they put us under, but they're not. They never are. The political elite. It's like, I was listening to my friend Alan Mosley's podcast, The Gold Standard.
That's TGS Alan Mosley.
At thegoldstandard.com, I think.
The Gold Standard Podcast.
Podcast.com, that's right. And he
Looking
had
out
on
for you, Alan.
Yeah, he had on Kevin Gutzman, which is the premier constitutional scholar. And Mr. Gutzman was pointing out that, you have these 9 people who are totally disconnected from the regular American person. These are Ivy League, political elite, politically connected people who really have never been under the kind of, lifestyle necessarily that the normal average American person has, or has been so far removed from that they're not really connected. And yet they, deign to make these laws that we have to be subject to.
We have the fiction that America is a democracy and that there's no caste system and there's not a protected class or a privileged class and then the common class. But you see it all the time. There are people, like, if you have the right friends, you're never subject to the law.
Right.
That you may get prosecuted, but that'll all go away before it comes to the end. Whether it's because you can afford a lawyer that knows all the loopholes, or if you can grease the right wheels, or they just don't even bother to charge you because they know you and, they're in your social club or whatever. So, the idea that we're somehow different from the rest of the world because, everybody can make it and sure, it's possible. Like, we have a president who came from, or the prior president came from relatively inauspicious beginnings and ended up the president, which is amazing.
Right.
But he got there via Harvard. So,
Right. Yes, so there's a lot of a particular indoctrination that happens through the Ivy League, and even I like to talk about the founders and the framers of the Constitution, because so many people look to them as some sort of demigods or virtue makers, and even Thomas Jefferson, he didn't like that the judiciary would have this power. Like he railed against it, and he said it's a dangerous doctrine indeed when they can make such decisions as law. And he called the Constitution has erected no such pardon me, single tribunal. So that's what he called the Supreme Court, was a single tribunal. And that wasn't ever the intent. And he's a lot closer to when was involved in all of that. So
right.
He could, he knew the original intent better probably than any of us. And so I like to remind people of that even the founders and the framers of the country, they didn't all agree that these were good things.
Yep.
And then everything that the Anti-Federalists said would come to pass has basically come to pass.
And then some.
Yeah, absolutely.
The idea that our country was founded on the idea of a 3% tax on tea was unreasonable.
Yeah.
And, that was enough to go to war. But today, we're like frogs that have just slowly had the heat turned up on us in the pot until now we're frog soup.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that the powers that were delegated were mostly to the legislature.
Right.
They weren't to the Supreme Court, and they weren't to the executive. Like that, they were doing the best they could. Okay, this is the thing. Like I don't love the Constitution. I don't love the system that we have, but I can recognize that it's better than a lot in many ways, and that they were doing the best they could with what they knew, but it was never intended for people not to have representation. And this also comes back to something that we've talked about before, that one person can't represent millions of people.
Yeah. They froze the number of representatives decades ago, when it used to grow so that it would stay approximately 30,000 people per representative. And now, or it was much lower than that, I think. I forget the details. But anyway, they stopped, and the population has gone up drastically in the time that they've frozen the number of representatives. But if they were to grow the House of Representatives anymore, then the power of the lobbyists would be diluted.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where it gets so big that you can't have debate, you can't have, discussion, and there's just it's too big to handle.
Although my dream government is from The Phantom Menace, it was from one of the prequels, Star Wars prequels, where they show this governing body that's just huge and cacophonous, and they get absolutely nothing done. And so my idea is a government that's gridlocked is a good government.
Yeah, that's why I support third parties, period. I happen to be, involved with the Libertarian Party because I am a libertarian. Not that the party necessarily represents all of libertarian philosophy. In many instances, it does not.
Well, yeah, but you're the original definition of libertarian, the bomb-throwing anarchist, communist.
Yeah. No,
like the original French libertarians.
Okay, you're getting off here, throwing me off. But now I don't remember what I was going to say.
You were going to say something about squirrels.
No, that wasn't it. Just that.
You like the third parties locking up
yes,
the system.
Yes. That's really, for me, the best situation that can come out of a government that is clearly off the rails and clearly overreaching is that we gridlock it with the political process,
no,
and we fight it with cultural education.
Yeah, it has to be a really important bill to make it through, to be able to get consensus if you've got non-colluding parties as part of government.
Right. And if we get actual libertarian candidates, and I don't mean libertarian as in just in the Libertarian Party, I mean the Justin Amashas as well, and the
Thomas
Massey,
Massey,
and all those guys, like the people who have a libertarian philosophical base. If we can get those people who actually have principled stances on anti-war and different things, then we can actually use that gridlock.
Yeah, I'll know we've gotten somewhere in the liberty movement when the farm bill doesn't get passed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. Like so many people, I guess you just have to pick your battles, though. That's the thing. The system is so big and there are so many bad things about it that it's hard to sort of fight it all. You have to sort of pick your battles because you have to stay in the game. Like this is part of the problem with the political process and
that's
why
why
you
they
become a whore when you go up there because
And that's why they have such giant bills like the Omnibus Spending Bill and the Farm Bill and the Defense Appropriations Act. Is instead of having to argue for every individual appropriation, they make it so that, we're going to give you this at midnight and then you have to vote on it at 9 a.m. And it's $100 trillion in, spending over the next 100 years that, you'll never find where all of the graft is hidden. You'll never find, you'll just be like, well, I guess as long as we curb the growth to 8% year over year, then we're cutting spending.
Yeah.
The idea that by increasing the budget, we're cutting spending, that lets everybody have the fiction that they're following their principles.
Yeah. And then we get, where are we, $13 trillion in debt?
21
now.
$21 trillion in debt.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, we just need to default and move on. Like, there's nothing, what do you do with that? That's just astronomical.
Yeah,
it's astronomical.
I really believe at this point that our only hope is to bankrupt the Fed.
Yeah.
Then we can just start again with somebody else's money. I like Litecoin,
Yeah, crypto.
Of course, I bought $1,000 worth of Litecoin and now I have $200 worth. So
yeah. It's a gamble. That's the thing. It's new and it's one of those, you're taking a risk, but you're at least putting your money where your principles are. And hopefully that investment will pay off at some point.
And I don't honestly care so much about that individual investment. It's a lot of money and it matters. I mean, I'm not rolling in money, but if supporting the idea of cryptocurrency, if we can get money that's decentralized and not controlled by a small number of people for the benefit of a particular sector or a particular, stratus of the economy. Mm-hmm. Like right now, bankers get rich when banks go bankrupt.
Yes.
Real estate, real estate investment companies make money no matter what happens. Yeah. And the idea that, the banks were too big to fail, so we have to prop them up with money we steal from the individual when, they didn't come and bail me out when their business practices caused my house to drop by 30% in value.
Right.
I'm stuck having rent come in that's 2/3 of my mortgage, and everybody benefits from that but me. And fine, I took a risk. I bought a house at the peak of the market, but you can't tell me that the banks that failed, who were making bad decisions, should be hurt less than the individual who's buying a house because they want to live there.
Right. And that's the crony class protecting their cronies. Like that's exactly a great example of that happening, that individuals paid a price for the practices of, one, that the government made law that banks had to practice, and then two, that the banks figured out a way to make money and have power and influence with.
Yep.
So then you have individuals paying that price for that. And like you said, they're not bailing us out. Right. They're not coming to save us when we make bad business decisions, but they save, companies. But
then the Fed just prints up $30 trillion more to hand to the banks and go, here, now it'll look like we'll put this money on deposit for you so it looks like you're financially solvent.
Right.
So that we can say we did something after the crisis. And then you guys have to use that to buy government bonds.
Yeah.
So it looks like people still believe in the U.S. government, so it'll stop inflation. And there's all these things that they do. It's just a house of cards.
Yeah.
And, the idea being is that, everybody makes money at the top.
Yeah. Cahoots. That's what we call it, in cahoots. So anyways, to get back towards what we were talking about a little bit more with the Constitution, I wanted to give this quote by Lysander Spooner, who is one of my...
Who's Lysander Spooner?
He was an amazing man. He was a lawyer, and he was anti-Constitution. And so one of the things he did was he wrote a book called No Treason. And the Constitution of No Authority is the subtitle. And there's a quote in it. It says, "But whether the Constitution really be one thing or another, this much is certain, that it has either authorized such a government as we have had, or has been powerless to prevent it. In either case, it is unfit to exist." And, you know, he lived a lot closer to the time of the Constitution's enactment. And he was very much against this idea that you can make a contract that obligates me, that you and another party that I have no party to can make a contract. That's basically what the Constitution is.
Right.
It's a contract that obligates me to a force that I never agreed to. So there are a lot of problems with it. And that, like we said before, we understand that this was a group of people doing the best they could and having lots of different opinions about, you know, the Constitution. So when people hold the Constitution up as some kind of sacred document that can never be changed, I mean, even the founders or the framers of the Constitution, they didn't even make it unchangeable.
Right. They just made it really hard.
Yes, they made it difficult, but not unchangeable. So we have to recognize that these things may outlive their usefulness, and that this was an experiment, and there may be ways to redefine and tweak and come up with something better. Like, it's given us many, many years of relative freedom.
Yeah. No, I mean, you know, the First Amendment and the Second Amendment still sort of hold some sway.
Yeah.
In that you can say things against the government as long as you're behind the fence.
Yeah.
Or, you know, you can print on newspaper things that are unpopular.
Yeah.
But you're losing some of that ability to say what you want to say on the internet. Like, you can get locked up for things that you say on the internet.
Yes.
Even if it's not actually, like, they're using you can't scream fire in a crowded theater. Well, how is the internet a crowded theater?
Yeah.
You know, I should be able to say anything insightful I want anywhere that's not going to cause a riot on the spot.
Yeah.
And I'm not even so sure about the not causing a riot on the spot thing, but, like, it's words. So if your words can inspire people who are like-minded to agree with you, then, you know, maybe somebody else should have been there to argue against me.
Yeah. It's just this idea that, you know, at least it's memorialized. Like, we believe that the Bill of Rights does memorialize natural rights, and that's a good thing. That, you know, we believe every human has the right to free speech and the right to self-defense, those types of things. So that's not bad that it's written down. It's not bad that it's there. It's bad that they think that is only contained in the American.
Right.
Like, who are people who are American, they have these rights, when really those are human rights. And when they apply them only to certain people or try to make caveats to those rights, like, well, you have the right to bear arms only if.
Yeah, that we have that just because somebody's an immigrant or somebody's in another country, that, you know, that we don't believe that they have the right to a fair trial or the right to speech or the right to anything. That, like, there's nothing in the Constitution that, and especially in the Declaration, that limits it to American citizens on American soil. It was intended to be an example for the world, and that as Americans we should be upholding those rights for everybody. We shouldn't be having black site prisons in countries that, you know, don't support our restrictions as a way to get around our own Constitution.
Yeah.
That we should be holding our government accountable for its misbehavior. And, you know, yes, there are consequences to standing up for your own natural rights. And there never, you know, of course there are consequences. And, you know, the hope is that as an American, that other Americans will help you stand up for yourself. And if you go to court for standing up for your rights, that hopefully the jury will nullify the decision, rather than, you know, people going, well, you know, I don't like that one.
Right.
You know, I didn't like what you said, so I'm okay with you going to jail.
Right. Yeah. And I, you know, just another reminder to these documents and these, you know, things that people hold as sacred. Well, just hold yourselves to that standard. This is from, you know, the Declaration of Independence, which we happen to
Yep.
love like that. If you ask me, the Declaration is all that we needed. But
Yeah, if you see me when I'm in my truck, ask. I've got 10,000 copies of the Declaration of Independence. I'll hand them out to anybody who wants them.
So we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of property is what it was originally intended to be. It's been changed to the pursuit of happiness, but it's property, because private property is such an important, it is the basis of freedom. You are your first property. You own yourself completely. That is the basis of all libertarian thought. So, we just want people to hold themselves to their own standards. That would
Right.
be better than what happens now, where, you have many people who proclaim Christianity and who, believe in a creator, and they believe this is sacred right here, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. And yet,
Yeah, I can't even begin to consider how many conversations I've had with Jeffersonian Republicans who believe that American rights are American.
right.
That it's not, it's because you got lucky, you won the lottery, you were born, inside our magic line, that you get rights that other people don't have.
Right.
No, we're supposed to defend those rights for everybody.
But they do this too, though. Like the police have rights we don't have. The state has rights we don't have.
Yep, somehow we've managed to delegate rights we don't have to people.
Exactly. And that's why it's important, I think, to remember to call them delegated rights and not states' rights. Like, I understand what people mean when they say states' rights, but they start to think in terms, and many people don't understand the difference, that the states themselves have rights. They do not. They only have the rights that you as an individual have because you are delegating it to them. It's like power of attorney. You're saying, okay, we want you as our representative to go to the federal government, and this is what we want you to lobby for, because that's really what they are. They're lobbyists in our interests. They're supposed to be in our interests. But I can't steal from you, right? I can't reach in your wallet right now and take money from you. But the state can do that. That is not a delegated right. That is an overstepping of their authority, because I don't have that right. I can't give it to you. So it doesn't magically become okay because we call it taxes, and they have guns pointed at you if you don't.
But, how would we have polite society without taxes?
Yeah, there was no polite society before that, was there?
Nope.
Not for millions and millions of years. Yeah, I understand people's apprehension about anarchism, about voluntary society. I understand that it's a leap in imagination.
It is. It's scary.
Yeah, it can be scary because we're so conditioned to rule of law. And saying that, I don't mean that there's no law in anarchism. What I mean is the rule of state-regulated law that other people, and this brings us, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, without a government, who's going to stop people we don't like from having barbecues in parks?
Right, or selling water bottles.
Yep.
Or lemonade stands, big lemonade, right?
Yep.
So this brings us to the idea of subsidiarity. So what that is that it's just saying that people in any given area should be making the political and social decisions for that area. So when you have a country of 300 million people, I mean, that's, to bring it all back around to the Supreme Court, that's a lot of people living in the shadow of 9 folks in black dresses.
Yep.
Like that is a lot of people who have many variant lifestyles.
8 and a zombie.
8 and a zombie. Aren't they all kind of zombies?
Well, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been dead for easily 2 years.
Yeah, it's been a while. Like, yeah, and even the
Weekend
ones,
at Ruth's.
yeah, even the judges that the conservatives hold up as these virtuous people are terrible on most of the when you're a one issue voter, and many conservatives are abortion only. They only care about what happens with abortion. Yeah, and guns. And those issues are important. I'm not saying they're not, but when you are willing to take whatever you get, as long as they're good on one issue, then you get terrible judiciaries. and that's not ever a great way. All or nothing.
Yeah.
I just there's so many problems. But back to subsidiarity. So, we've often talked about how, we live in Tennessee. Tennessee has a different lifestyle for most people. There's a different lifestyle than you have in, say, California or Montana or Alaska.
Yep.
You and I both have lived all over the country, and it's different from place to place. People
Yep.
have different sets of values, what's socially acceptable, and some of those cross through that,
Yeah,
but some of those don't.
There is an American culture, but it doesn't outrank or overpower urban versus rural, wealthy versus poor, the academic areas versus the more blue collar areas.
Yeah.
There's lots of different divides in our country, and just because you have 51% of the population that agrees with you on an issue
Right.
doesn't mean that you should be able to use that to impact the lives of somebody that's not like the. Where you say, well, you guys should be living my way because I've got 51% of the
Right.
people.
You shouldn't be able to get married because I don't like it. My religion doesn't agree with it. When the whole point is that, government shouldn't be involved with it in the first place. And it's never 51%. Like, that's the other thing. I was listening to the Senate hearings today that are going on, and Trey Gowdy said, we live in a 50-50 society. We accept that. No, we don't. Most people don't even involve themselves in the political process. It's never a majority of the people. A majority of the people are opted out,
Yeah.
which is fine by me. I'm not saying you should vote. I'm not telling you that you owe anybody your vote. Like, this is one of the things that we have many discussions about with
The
other
recommendation
friends.
I make for people is go and vote for Mickey Mouse.
Right.
Go, make a vote that is intentionally either, a write-in to none of the above, pick a third party,
Show that you're
Right.
engaged, but you're opting out.
Yes. See, if you don't show up, then you don't count. If you want to, if you don't like either choice, and I approve of that.
Yeah.
I mean, oh my God, the choices are terrible. Like this last election, we had 2 bad choices and then 3 other bad choices. So, I liked one of those 3 other bad choices by comparison, but even that was a
not
stretch.
was not a good choice.
But if you vote, if there's 2 people that are likely to be in the running, if you vote for somebody other than those 2 people, you're telling the system, pick a better candidate next time.
Yeah.
You know,
You're making them have to count you. And this is what our friend Justin and we had a discussion about one evening, is he's very much for you should vote, you should be involved in the political process, like a lot of people are. And my point to him was that a lot of people aren't even counted in that. When you don't vote, they don't tell you, well, this percentage of people voted for this person, this percentage voted for this person, but the majority of people didn't vote for either one. So, to me, that'd be, well, election null and void, anarchy, new best friend,
Yep.
So that they never let you know that, because they don't want to. They have to legitimize the system.
Yeah.
So if they make it sound like, well, most of your neighbors agreed with so-and-so, so therefore you're subject to what they wanted. Most of your neighbors don't want to make you do things.
Yeah, it would be interesting if, they had to report percentage of vote as a percentage of the registered voters instead of the people participating in the vote.
Yeah.
So-and-so won with 5% of registered voters.
Right.
And 51%.
That's
of
not
the
a
active
mandate.
voters.
Yeah, that's not a mandate. So, we just, I guess, to wrap everything up, because I think it's about that time,
It is.
isn't it? Yeah. So, to wrap everything up, it's just to consider these concepts, to consider that there are new ways of doing things, that we don't have to stick with a system that is clearly broken and not working to the best of liberty. I know that Judge Napolitano said something in a video I watched of his that was really great. And he said the judiciary should be about expanding liberty, not restricting it. But so often they only act to restrict liberty. When's the last time they gave us more of what are we naturally already own, but they get in the way of. It's not like we don't have liberty. We have those full rights regardless of what a piece of paper or anyone else says. But people inhibit those. So, and not that we have all the answers.
Right.
Like nothing is going to end all human suffering. So no government system, but to endow it with sacred words, sacred thoughts, as if flags and constitutions and offices of government are somehow sacred, is a very, very dangerous road to go down. Because if they're only sacred when your guy's in office,
right,
and they're not sacred when the other guy's in office, that's a problem. And also, if they're always sacred, then you can never have a problem with anything they do, because if it's all God's will. Like, so I would really encourage my Christian friends to consider that these things aren't necessarily the worst thing ever. We're not saying that.
Nope.
But they're also not sacred, and they're not inviolate, and they can be changed. And there's no reason why we can't have that discourse and talk about changing them. This Supreme Court stuff, I mean, there's just a lot of problems with the way that it was set up. And even the framers of the Constitution didn't all agree on it. And the ones that disagreed have been proven right.
Yeah. And I would say that, like, if you find yourself where you see somebody who's doing something that is illegal but not hurting somebody else, and it's, and you are in a position to help, you should help step in and say, hey, leave that person alone. That's not, like, if you see someone calling the cops on somebody for having a barbecue or for selling lemonade, be like, hey, mind your own business.
Right.
They're not hurting anybody. Stick up for people that are acting, in a way
peaceful, that are just living their lives. There should be no law against having a barbecue and being responsible. There should be no law against selling a water bottle, because...
And there's nothing that obligates anybody to be an agent of the state.
Exactly. But we're so, this is 1984 stuff, right? They're so indoctrinated and so have that mindset of the police, that they police themselves. You don't even need a real police force anymore, because you've got the people to do it to themselves when they're not hurting anyone.
Right.
They're reporting people for doing things that don't hurt anyone. So, I guess that's just the wrap up for this, is that, let's consider some of these ideas. Let's try and figure out a way to have more individual freedom and less government intrusion. And I want to make it clear too that I'm not necessarily against governance. Governance is something that every area is going to have to figure out for themselves. The state is the force behind the government that we have right now. It's the political system that puts a gun to your head and says, pay me this money, even though we don't own it.
Right.
Like we don't deserve it. We didn't do anything to get it. But because you live here and we own you, then, and that's really what it's about. It's about the ownership of people and power and all that stuff. So governance, not the state. And that should be on a very, very much more localized level.
Yep.
So, all right, guys.
So as we go, remember to check out our friends Alan Mosley with the Gold Standard, the 10th Amendment Center, the Beacon Center of Tennessee. And there's a new podcast out that you guys might want to check out. It's called Postcards from Somalia.
Yes.
Google it. It's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, Alan and I are doing that podcast, and we had so much fun doing it. And it's really different than this. It's not academic. It's just our opinions and us being us together and smart assy.
You get to see Sherry being full rage Sherry.
Yeah, sometimes. So, and you can check us out on Facebook and Twitter and all those places, SoundCloud, iTunes.
Yep. Yeah, if you go to facebook.com/SherryVoluntary, you'll find the links to the show.
Yeah. All right, guys. Till next time. Bye.